Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the August 30th, 2022 Special Planning Commission meeting. We have a number of items coming out of committees this week, as well as 7 other discussion items on the agenda today. I would ask the commissioners to hold all questions until the conclusion of all presentations and any public comments so we can move through the agenda efficiently. We start every meeting with the opportunity for the public to comment on an item that is not contained on the agenda. Are there any members of the public who would like to speak on an item that is not on the agenda this week? Seeing none, I will move on to the consent agenda. There's one item listed on the consent agenda. This is case Z222. It's been identified by staff as being inconsistent with both the comprehensive plan and the future land use map, and it's recommended that this item be heard at the committee of the whole per our bylaws. Without objection, I'd like to refer this to our September 22nd meeting of the Committee of the Whole. Seeing none opposed, I'm going to move on to the committee report.
Excuse me.
Oh,
I apologize. We just want to clarify, because in the write-up it wasn't totally clear, that the public hearing for that matter will be conducted by the Committee of the Whole rather than just a discussion. So the opportunity to be heard is at the Committee of the Whole.
Okay. To clarify, the public can be heard at a public hearing at that Committee of the Whole meeting on September 22nd. Moving on to the committee report, there's nothing coming out of the Committee of the Whole from the meeting last week. However, we do have 2 items coming out of the Infrastructure and Mobility meeting. I will pass it over to Committee Chair Bennett to talk about those 2 items.
Thank you, Chair Fox. The Infrastructure and Mobility Committee met on August 25th. We discussed 2 items, Z1722, Hillsborough Street and Southwest Street, and Z2022, Pleasant Valley Road. For Z1722, the request seeks to rezone 6 parcels totaling 0.99 acres from downtown mixed-use 20-story shop front frontage to downtown mixed-use 40-story shop front frontage with zoning conditions. The proposed conditions prohibit certain uses and require a public art installation prior to a certificate of occupancy. Conditions about parking deck screening and lighting were removed to avoid any conflict with changes to the UDO proposed in TC 221, which contains similar screening and lighting requirements for parking structures. After hearing from staff and the applicant, the committee determined the request is consistent with the comprehensive plan and future land use map and voted it out to Planning Commission with a unanimous recommendation for approval. Do you want to deal with that one, or do you want me to go ahead and?
Let's do it this one first.
Okay.
Is there any discussion or questions from any other commissioners? Seeing none, I'd like to entertain a motion.
I'll do it.
Okay.
I move to recommend adoption of the proposed consistency statement dated August 25th, 2022, contained in the agenda materials, and to recommend approval of the zoning amendment. The request is consistent with the comprehensive plan and future land use map. It is reasonable and in the public interest because it would allow increased land use intensity in the urban core of Raleigh with high access to transit and employment options.
Thank you. Commissioner Bennett has offered a motion to recommend approval of Z1722. Do we have a second? Commissioner Elder offers a second. Is there any additional discussion or debate on the merits of the motion? Seeing none, those in favor? Any opposed? That motion passes unanimously.
For Z2022, Pleasant Valley Road, the request seeks to rezone approximately 18.55 acres near the intersection of Glenwood Avenue and Pleasant Valley Road from commercial mixed-use 3 stories conditional use and commercial mixed-use 3 stories parking limited to commercial mixed-use 5 stories parking limited conditional use. Proposed conditions would prohibit certain uses and would limit the number of vehicle trips that development on the site could generate. After hearing from staff and the applicant, the committee had some questions about the condition related to vehicle trips, but was comfortable that the condition does not preclude a traffic impact analysis from being prepared at site plan. The committee determined that the requested amendment is consistent with the comp plan and future land use map and voted it out to the Planning Commission with a unanimous recommendation for approval.
Excellent, thank you. Any questions or comments from commissioners? Seeing none, I'd like to entertain a motion.
I'll do it. I move to recommend adoption of the proposed consistency statement dated August 25th, 2022, contained in the agenda materials, and to recommend approval of the zoning amendment. The request is consistent with the comprehensive plan and future land use map. It is reasonable and in the public interest because it would increase the amount of housing the site could contain, allowing additional people to live at a mixed-use node. It would allow more compact development in an existing commercial node on a major transportation corridor, facilitating efficient use of land and transportation infrastructure.
Excellent. And do we have a second? Second, Commissioner Otwell. Commissioner Bennett has offered a motion to recommend approval of Z 2022. Commissioner Otwell has offered a second. Is there any additional discussion or debate on the merits of the motion? Seeing none, by show of hands, those in favor? Any opposed? That motion passes unanimously. Moving on to the report of the Text Change Committee. Text Change Committee Chair, Commissioner Raines, is absent and excused, so I will work through his notes. There were 3 items coming out from the August 19th Text Change Committee meeting. First item is TC 2120, minor administrative permits. This proposed amendment to the UDO creates a process for minor administrative permits to improve transparency and exempts certain improvements and uses from this process, though otherwise regulated by the UDO, and clarifies that changes of use where no improvements to the building or site are proposed only require a minor administrative permit. This was discussed at our August 19th meeting, and the committee recommends approval 3-0. Are there any questions or comments from commissioners? Seeing none, I'd like to entertain a motion.
Thanks, Chair Fox. Regarding TC 2120, I move to adopt the proposed consistency statement dated August 30th, 2022, containing the agenda materials, and to recommend approval of the zoning text amendment. Action taken is reasonable and in the public interest because establishment of a process for minor administrative permits will improve transparency and accountability.
Excellent, thank you. And do we have a second? Second from Commissioner Bennett. Commissioner Dautel has offered a motion to recommend approval of TC 2120. Commissioner Bennett has offered a second. Is there any additional discussion or debate on the merits of the motion? Seeing none, by show of hands, those in favor? Any opposed? That motion passes unanimously. Moving on to the next item from the Text Change Committee is TC 1821, accessory structures. This proposed amendment to the UDO unifies height standards for accessory structures and accessory dwelling units, consolidates encroachment allowances for occupiable building features and other minor improvements, deletes some extraneous regulations from the principal building dimensional tables, and clarifies some of the existing language. This was discussed at our June 21st, August 2nd, and August 19th Text Change Committee meetings. The committee recommends approval 3-0. Are there any questions or comments from commissioners? Seeing none, I'd like to entertain a motion. Commissioner Dautel?
Thanks, Chair Fox. For TC 1821, I move to adopt the proposed consistency statement dated August 30th, 2022, contained in the agenda materials, and to recommend approval of the zoning text amendment. The action taken is reasonable in the public interest because accessory structures and accessory dwelling units should be treated similarly with respect to height and setbacks, and setback encroachment allowances also should be unified for structures with a similar impact.
Thank you. And I would like to offer a second. Commissioner Dautel has offered the motion to recommend approval of TC 1821, and I have offered a second. Is there any additional discussion or debate on the merits of the motion? Seeing none, by show of hands, those in favor? And any opposed? That motion passes unanimously. Moving on to the next item, which is TC 522, roadway construction, nonconformities, and signage. This proposed amendment to the UDO allows only government-owned temporary signage in the right-of-way, clarifies that easement acquisition would not render a property improvement or site element nonconforming, and specifies when items can be reinstalled in the right-of-way after a government-funded or initiated project. This was discussed at our August 19th meeting, where the committee recommended approval 3-0. Is there any questions or comments from commissioners?
I have a question. When there are city projects, or I guess really projects by anybody, but specifically city projects, is all the signage used for those construction projects owned by the city? I was under the impression that sometimes contractors own that signage, like road construction, safety signage. I'm assuming that would be considered temporary signage in the right-of-way that's not city-owned. So I just had a question about whether or not this speaks to that, or there's not.
That's a good question. I think actually the intent of this text change is a little bit different. It's related to signage that might direct passersby to businesses. So there are instances where when a road is closed, there's still an interest in directing people to a property. So the city will take it upon themselves to erect a temporary sign that points people to a business. There are also instances where there might be a business sign within the right-of-way or within the area that is subsumed by the right-of-way. And so this is just a text change that acknowledges that.
Sure. I guess my question was just whether or not we're unintentionally setting ourselves up for not allowing road construction signage during a road project that's not city-owned.
No, ma'am, I don't believe that's the case.
Okay.
Yeah.
Excellent. Are there any additional questions or comments from commissioners? Seeing none, I'd like to entertain a motion.
Great. Thanks, Chair Fox. Regarding TC 522, I move to adopt the proposed consistency statement dated August 30th, 2022, containing the agenda materials, and recommend approval of the zoning text amendment. Action taken is reasonable in the public interest because it will reduce the impacts to private property owners and the city during the development of city projects.
Excellent, thank you. And do we have a second?
Second.
Commissioner Bennett? Commissioner Dautel has offered a motion to approve TC 522. Commissioner Bennett has offered a second. Is there any additional discussion or debate on the merits of the motion? Seeing none, by show of hands, those in favor? And any opposed? Okay. You opposed?
Yeah.
Would you like to state the rationale?
Yeah, maybe I should have been more thorough in my questioning. I guess I'm still unclear as to how that does not how are we not saying in this that signage that, I understand that the question I'm asking is somewhat besides the point of the intent of the text change, but it still seems like we are not being consistent with the way business is actually done as far as signage in the right-of-way. And not just for city projects, if I can expand that, also utility projects that are in the right-of-way where, lanes may need to be blocked in normal course of business, which I think is probably how we operate now. And there may be something else in the UDO that somehow would alleviate my problem, my question. I just still not clear.
I think the primary distinction here is this text change is meant to address signage for the purpose of advertising. And what you're referencing is regulatory signage, which is allowed within the right-of-way, regardless of if it's a contractor for the city or the utility company or the city itself. The regulatory signage is permitted.
Okay, so this text change is specific to like wayfinding.
Correct,
signage.
right, for a business,
Okay,
right.
then I'm not opposed. I'm allowed to change it.
Yes. So to be clear, that motion then passes unanimously after Commissioner Elder had her question answered. Moving on to the old business portion of the agenda. There's one item listed under old business today. This item has been previously discussed, and we have received presentations and heard from the public. So we will begin with a short update from staff focusing on the revisions to the request. We'll start with a staff presentation from Ira Mabel.
Good morning. So this request is for 9/10 of an acre on Hillsborough Street, from office mixed use 7 and 3 stories to office mixed use 20. Like the chair said, deferred on August 9th for new conditions, which have been submitted, and your deadline is in October. So just an aerial to remind you of the site today and what is there. So the first condition prohibits some uses that was there or in the case last time. The two new conditions, the first one is applying what will be the new parking deck screening standards to the western property line, so this one in particular. And that's the standards for active uses and screening elements. And then there is a second requirement for some public art installation. So the case is, none of this has changed, consistent with the comprehensive plan and urban form map, but inconsistent with the future land use map. So approval of this request would change it to staff recommends central business district. And that is the update. Happy to answer any technical questions.
Excellent. Thank you, Mr. Mabel. Do we have any questions or comments from commissioners? Commissioner Dautel?
Thanks, Chair Fox. Maybe just one kind of clarification question. The reason why the zoning condition applies to the western boundary only is because the southern and eastern would be subject to that.
Correct.
The
Right.
parking
Yep.
screening requirements anyway.
That is correct. Yeah, because they face a public street. So yeah.
Thanks.
Excellent. It appears the applicant has addressed our previous questions. So if there are no other questions or comments from commissioners, I'd like to entertain a motion. Previous questions regarded screening on the western property boundary to provide some kind of transitional element, as the text change regarding parking deck screening would not necessarily apply to that property line.
I'm going to move to recommend adoption of the proposed consistency statement dated August 30th, 2022, contained in the agenda materials, and to recommend approval of the zoning amendment. This recommendation also includes amendment to the future land use map to the extent described in the adopted consistency statement.
Excellent, thank you. And do we have a second? Commissioner Elder? Commissioner Otwell has offered a motion to approve Z1622. Commissioner Elder has offered a second. Is there any additional discussion or debate on the merits of the motion? Seeing none, by show of hands, those in support? Any opposed? That motion passes unanimously. Moving on to new business, there are 6 items on the new business agenda today. These requests have not appeared on a previous Planning Commission agenda, and we will hear a full staff presentation and applicant presentation. Item F.1 is case Z5121 on Atlantic Avenue. This is a request to rezone approximately 6.77 acres from industrial mixed-use 3 stories parking limited to commercial mixed-use 20 stories conditional use. Conditions limit certain uses, require the installation of a bike share station, and provide limits for peak area trips. We will start with a staff presentation from Don Bell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning, members of the Planning Commission. Just a reminder that your deadline for action on this case is October 29th. Note that the zoning in the area is predominantly industrial mixed use. There is an area of commercial mixed use to the north. There's a good bit of low-scale residential outside of this commercial/industrial area that's flanked by Atlantic Avenue, Capitol Boulevard, and the Norfolk Southern Rail Line. Many of the several of these industrial sites within this area have, over the recent years, been repurposed into other commercial activities. Here's a close-up of the site. Note some of those retrofits, if you will, the Raleigh Ironworks project and the East End Market PD. Also, Fairfield is the closest residential area. It's a circa 1949, early 50s, single-family residential neighborhood. Just some streetscape perspectives here along at East Whitaker Mill and Atlantic. And again, Atlantic Avenue over the Norfolk Southern rail line, and note the site being located at the divergence of those two corridors. Other perspectives, Raleigh Ironworks, current intersection, a streetscape from the aforementioned Fairfield neighborhood, and another view of Atlantic Avenue South with the site to the left. And notice the elevation change between the road and the site proper. Some of the conditions, a few prohibited uses here, namely vehicle repair, major and minor, being prohibited in this area, which is an IX use otherwise. The site plan, another condition offered was to locate either on the property along the adjacent right-of-way or along the existing Crabtree Creek or proposed Pigeon House Greenway Trail to accommodate a city bike share stations. The applicant has also proposed a vehicle trips budget with that volume equivalent to 850 multifamily dwelling units, 125 hotel rooms, 250,000 square feet of office, and 55,000 square feet of retail space. Some differences here between the existing IX zoning and the proposed CX. The residential density would, of course, increase substantially, as would the maximum number of units. Not a drastic change in the office square footage entitlement. Retail entitlement would actually decrease under this proposal, and about, as you see, 736,000 square feet of industrial space would be removed with this request. The proposal scores high marks in our transportation and energy analysis, as you see, located as it is in a frequent transit area and between two BRT station areas. Higher scores on all of these metrics. Bus service, the area is generally served by transit. The Wake Forest Raleigh Express route does go up Atlantic Avenue, but it is the closest stop is actually, and I'll go back to that slide, about a quarter of a mile away on Wake Forest. And to get to it because you have to cross the railroad. And there's another bus stop along Old Lewisburg 401 south of the site. So 0.25 miles and a third of a mile respectively, more close to within walking distance of transit, but not extremely convenient there. And this proposal does not include subsidized units. We found that the area has a lower percentage of minority and low-income populations, slightly higher in folks over the age of 64 and under 5 years of age. Notably, a slower rate of increase in median gross rent in this area than the city average, and we found no restrictive covenants that restricted racial groups. The proposal is consistent with the future land use designation of community mixed use. However, it is inconsistent with the urban form map. As you can see, this proposal is right between two transit station areas, close to the major city growth center, within a frequent transit area, and along an urban thoroughfare. And the lack of frontage primarily renders this proposal to be inconsistent with urban form. Again, consistent with the flume, inconsistent with urban form. It is consistent overall with the comprehensive plan. There are a number of key policies where the proposal is consistent. Compact development, healthy communities are key policies, of course, in these areas where there is expected to be a high level of transit. Capitalizing on transit access, and this is an ideal location, and station area land uses. This parcel is also within the area of the Capitol Boulevard area plan. Two policies there noted as consistent. However, there are several inconsistent policies as a result of these policies not being addressed in the proposal. Housing, mixed income neighborhoods and housing diversity, there was no proposals brought forward to address housing diversity and affordability. And as previously mentioned, the lack of frontage really hampers these other urban design policies with regard to transit-oriented development and supporting the pedestrian networks and the public realm that would be associated with convenient transit use. It is also inconsistent with one of the policies in the Capitol Boulevard plan, as you see, transitioning to transit. And these are the outstanding issues on this case. No frontage. The proposal lacks improvements to the public realm. It does not offer any publicly accessible recreational amenities for an area where 20-story height and 850 residential units will potentially be developed, nor does it address housing affordability, as previously mentioned. Again, your deadline for action is October 29th, and there are 4 upcoming Planning Commission meetings before that time. Thank you very much. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Mr. Belk. Next, we're going to move on to the applicant. The applicant and those in support have a total of 10 minutes to speak.
Morning, Madam Chair, members of the Planning Commission. Michael Birch with Longleaf Law Partners here on behalf of the property owner. Thank you, Don, for that staff report. So again, the request for this property is CX20 with conditions that address prohibited uses, provision of a bike share, as well as limiting trips. Again, the purpose of this request is to permit a mix of uses and additional height to facilitate redevelopment of the site for a mix of residential, office, ground floor retail. This request seeks to build on the energy in this area, between downtown and midtown, really started by Dock 1053. Here, you also have Raleigh Iron Works. The first phase is now open with the reused warehouse, and there's also the new apartment building that is close to opening. And then, as Don mentioned, there's also the big East End Market PD here with residential, office, and retail. And there will also be future phases of ironworks as well. So as staff noted, the request is consistent with the future land use map, consistent with the comprehensive plan, including with regard to the requested height. But the primary inconsistency noted in the report is results from a lack of a frontage. And so, and really kind of related to urban form and how development on this site will relate to Atlantic Avenue. Don mentioned it in his presentation, but just want to highlight, this photo probably doesn't do it justice, but this site sits significantly below the grade of Atlantic Avenue. As Don mentioned, Atlantic Avenue down here to the south, kind of on the bottom of the screen, as it starts to go over Norfolk Southern line, obviously starts to rise while the railroad stays low. This site has been served by the railroad in the past, and so it sits low kind of at the same grade as the railroad as Atlantic increases in grade. It's about 10 feet below grade here, up near the intersection of Atlantic and Whitaker Mill, and in places, 20 feet or more below grade as you get to the southern end of the site. And so, as we were looking at the different frontage options, different frontage standards, it became increasingly evident that it would be very difficult to just add a frontage. I think that was something that the development to the north ran into as well, Ironworks, both with the existing buildings as well as the future phase. Given the difference in grade, there were a number of alternates to some of the frontage requirements there along that site. So that is why we have not added a frontage. One of the other items that was mentioned was about one of the auto-oriented uses. We're happy to prohibit drive-throughs. That's not something we're intending to preserve by any means. The ability to do that, but and maybe there are some aspects of frontage that we could address in terms of maybe just proximity of buildings to the road and kind of creating maybe a street wall along Atlantic. But in terms of, I think it'd be difficult for us to really nail down the relationship of these buildings to Atlantic at this point in time. And I think we can also attempt to address some, say, publicly accessible, but certainly some outdoor amenity area that serves the development as well. So we're happy to address those items. Understand that would require a deferral, but also just wanted to come here and receive some input from Planning Commission as well before we kind of make our one set of changes to the conditions at the Planning Commission stage. So happy to address any questions the commission may have and that may be raised by the public. So,
Thank you.
thanks.
Are there any members of the public who wish to speak on this item? Seeing none, I'll open for questions and comments from commissioners. I will start off, since you are near the podium still, Mr. Birch. My primary concern was the inconsistency that was noted with the lack of a frontage. I understand the concerns and the challenges with providing a frontage on the Atlantic Avenue side. I'm wondering if we could add conditions to address that little stub of Whitaker Mill. And then I also heard your offer of prohibiting drive-throughs, providing a street wall on Atlantic, and providing some kind of outdoor amenity, if I might add that as well. I believe some public realm improvements might be warranted in this area.
Yes, it certainly is kind of noted in the staff report. There are no sidewalks on this side of Atlantic Avenue, certainly south of Whitaker Mill, and also kind of north of Ironworks. So we will be making those improvements as part of any redevelopment of this site. We did look at and kind of thought that strengthening the relationship between this property and what's going on at Ironworks would be important, and I think we can address that. I think actually some of that will be addressed through the TIA recommended improvements in terms of like pedestrian safety crossing Whitaker Mill. That kind of odd shape of the property does present an issue in terms of talking about build to and those things relative to Whitaker Mill. But I think we can look at kind of some pedestrian connectivity there because right now this is again kind of a future phase of Raleigh Ironworks there. Right now it's a surface parking lot, but don't expect it to be that way for long. So we think we can certainly utilize the frontage we do have on Whitaker Mill for some pedestrian accessibility from the site there.
Excellent. Do any other commissioners have any questions or comments? No? Commissioner Bennett?
Thank you. The staff report noted, I was trying to find the exact spot. The staff report noted the significant public benefit of the bike share station, but it also noted that the applicant could do more to be more pedestrian and bicycle friendly. So that made me wonder, how significant is the public benefit if the infrastructure isn't being provided, it sounds like from the staff report, to make biking in the area attractive? That may be a question for
Well,
staff, I don't know.
I'll try and take a first cut at it, and then I'll let Don speak from
Okay.
a staff standpoint. But I think the provision of the bike share at this location is a public benefit because it is a kind of missing link in an area as the city tries to expand north the service. Some of the cases coming to you in the next few months will, include a bike share station up here at Ratchford, along the Crabtree Creek Greenway Trail. So even though this property does not have immediate frontage along the Greenway Trail, it does have access that if you were able to use a bike share bike, you could easily access that. There's planned separated bike lanes along Atlantic Avenue, and there is also planned multi-use trail improvements along Atlantic north of Hodges. But as development occurs kind of from this site north, there will be a connection, up that way as well. So I think even though this property may be moving somewhat early relative to some of the infrastructure, we thought it was important to go ahead and put in place, that bike share. And I'll turn it over to Don and other staff if they want to address that.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Yes, certainly the proposal for a bike share station is a significant public benefit, more so, of course, if it is located on the site itself. But I think our concern really related to several of the urban design policies that without the frontage, you really can't address that interface between the built environment, the access to transit, and that sort of public and pedestrian realm in between. What does that environment look like? Is it pleasant for walking, sitting, you're just spending time? People going back and forth. We're thinking, long range here when there's frequent BRT, even rail in the future. So really it did stem from that lack of frontage. And from that, there could have been a number of other more in-depth discussions about exactly what that public realm would look like. So that's what led us to, and so right now, if the city bike share station were to be located, say, on the Capitol area Greenway, our concern now is without that addressing that interface, how do you get to that bike station? So those were some of our concerns, really.
Tier 3 site development plan would include sidewalks and bicycle lanes along Atlantic Avenue. Was that correct?
That is correct. However, there, still without the frontage, you're talking, having a, pretty close build to of a 20-story building to that. So there's, really no place there for, that interface that we've described.
With the offered addition of some of the items that the applicant walked through with this street wall, providing a street wall on Atlantic and the outdoor amenity and some pedestrian connectivity items, as well as addressing frontage and public realm concerns on that East Whitaker Mill stub. Are there any additional items you would like to add to that, Commissioner Bennett?
Thank you. I don't expect this to be addressed by the applicant, but I'm going to say it anyway because this is what I talk about. I noted in the staff report the inconsistency, or I guess not so much inconsistency, but the lack of an opportunity to take advantage of the equitable development around transit policy guidance to have some affordable housing. It is disappointing when we continue to see these very intense developments in North Raleigh not take advantage of the opportunity to build in some affordability, and we continue to see the affordable housing projects in the same part of town. I don't think that is consistent with what the city's stated affordable housing and equity goals are. So I just wanted to make the comment. This rezoning is not the only one that has not taken advantage of that opportunity, but I wanted to make note of that because it's a lost opportunity, in my opinion. And I understand the difficulty of the challenges of providing affordable housing in some of these developments. So I'm not minimizing that, but it would just be nice to see some creativity with some of these developments to get some mix of incomes.
Excellent. Thank you for your comment.
Mr. Birch, could you talk a little about the potential rail to trail conversion?
Yeah, so I think that's probably more within the scope of the Raleigh Ironworks project. That is something actually that the developer of that site is discussing with staff this week. Obviously, Norfolk Southern plays a mighty large role in that conversation, given that they control the rail corridor and they have a policy of no kind of easements or crossings, vehicular or pedestrian. So that is, I understand the developer of that project is working on trying to facilitate a connection to the Crabtree Creek Greenway that does involve some of the rail corridor, but that particular crossing kind of in that Pete and Steel Drive area, that's something that the railroad has balked at to date. But again, I think that's something that is actively being discussed in the context of that Ironworks project.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Do we have a sufficient amount of time? It sounds like we need to defer this. Do we have enough time to get this on the September 13 agenda? Is that? Does that seem? Okay. Okay. Excellent. Unless there are any other comments related to additional conditions that the applicant might consider, I'm going to recommend deferral of this item to the September 13th meeting. Excellent. All right, seeing none. Moving on to the next item in new business, which is case Z2122 on Rock Quarry. This is a request to rezone approximately 28.4 acres from residential 4 to residential 10 conditional use. Conditions limit density to 6 units per acre. We will start with the staff presentation from Ira Mabel.
Good morning again. So like all new business today, your deadline is in the end of October. So this area is largely zoned residential. You can see the purple colors on the left side of the picture there. There is quite a bit of industrial zoning on the other side of the creek, which you can probably see better on this slide here. So this site is near Barwell Road Elementary. I've marked the Old Town, which I think newer aerials show a lot of that is cleared and being constructed now. And the other residential subdivisions that would, connect on the street network to this site. So this site does have a Rock Quarry address, but doesn't actually touch Rock Quarry Road anymore. So there's a bit of a closer in picture. You can see the street stubs, as mentioned in the staff report, I believe. There are 4 that touch the site. A couple of photos looking at some of the stubs from the various points of entry. So one single condition, just a hard cap on dwelling units per acre. So not much of an increase in terms of raw number of units. So duplex is allowed in R4, but R10 would allow all building types. So townhouses and apartments would be permitted. A bit mixed on the transportation and energy scores. There is some transit on Rock Quarry Road, but it is 60-minute service. So not super high in terms of that or the walkability scores either. Would allow more units to be built and more types of units and smaller units than otherwise. And in a relatively diverse part of the city that is, I think most of these neighborhoods were constructed in the early 2000s-ish timeframe. So consistent with the future land use map of low-scale residential, because of that cap in units per acre mainly. No urban form guidance, although residential districts cannot have a frontage anyway, but there is no guidance on the map here. Consistent with policies about infill and compact development and zoning for housing. And again, your deadline is end of October with 4 meetings between now and then. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Mabel. Next, we're going to move on to the applicant presentation. The applicant and those in support have a total of 10 minutes to speak.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the Commission. My name is Isabel Maddox. I'm here today on behalf of the property owner, Wesley Wood. Mr. Wood is due here any minute, and his broker, Clyde Douglas, is also here. Thank you, Ira, for that presentation. Property is 28 acres. It's previously the site of Wesley's grandfather's home place and farm. He inherited this property, and now that the city has sort of moved out to him, he has decided it's time to develop this property. Even though it has a Rock Quarry Road address, it doesn't actually front on Rock Quarry. And it probably did at some point, maybe in a different configuration, but it doesn't. So the property really accesses Rock Quarry through going, and let me see if I can show you the, can I, how do I, oh, just through the mouse, okay. Yeah, so you can see it accesses on Cowan and then interlock out that way. We requested an R10 zoning with a cap of 6. So the R10, when we actually filed this case, was back in, I think, January or February. We kind of had some delays. At that point, we could not do a townhouse in R6. So we requested R10. Now we could do it after missing middle, and we could actually get a lot of density even with the R4. But the R10 allows us a little more flexibility in how that property is laid out. And I think as Ira told you, there are some challenges here on this site because we have these major utility rights of way. There's one going north-south, and then there's one going approximately, well, it's not quite that low, but right in that area. So there'll be a substantial amount of this property that will not be developable, and so it really helps to have the extra flexibility of R10, but the cap still is R6. There's 6 units to the acre. So, it gives the developer the flexibility, gives the neighbors the comfort of a fairly low density. We think will be something fairly compatible with the neighborhood. It won't probably be single-family detached, but it will be a fairly low density, a maximum of 170 units on this 28 acres. So it's pretty low density. We've met with the neighborhood a couple of times. The McCady Park people to the north, their main issues are traffic and Rock Quarry. As any of you travel that road, it can get pretty congested particularly at rush hours. There's the Old Town development underway across Rock Quarry, but there are a couple of projects I think will help. There's the realignment of Pearl Road and Barwell and Rock Quarry, which I think will help when that gets completed. There's also a major widening project of Rock Quarry. So when those projects get done, I think it'll help that situation. I also think that this development may help the McCady Park people have another right of access. Right now, they're landlocked. I mean, they have one point of access. They basically can come out on interlock and go out like that, out to Rock Quarry. But once this project gets developed, we believe there'll be, road connections required. There's a stub here, which we're hoping not to have to do because it's in the back corner, which is basically utility easements. But there's another one here that we think we will definitely do. It will allow the McCady Park people to come out through here and connect down and get out through Pearl Road. So we think that'll be a benefit long-term for the McCady Park development. So really, this is a fairly simple request. It's maintaining the low density area. It's consistent with the future land use map of low density residential in this area. It's consistent with the comprehensive plan. It brings some benefits and it adds housing units. It's not official affordable, with apologies to all of you. I mean, it's you know, as you know, it's hard to do that without going through the Housing Finance Agency process, and that requires a lot of, you know, expertise that we don't have at this point. But I do think it will provide for a lower cost housing, because if you have some attached product here in this neighborhood, and it will add to the diversity of housing types here, because I think this will be an attached product, whereas this is mostly single-family detached that abuts this area. It facilitates infill, again, consistent with the FLUM, consistent with the comp plan. So we request your approval and are available to answer any questions that you might have.
Thank you, Ms. Maddox. Do we have any members of the public here to speak on this item?
Good morning. Greetings, Chairperson and members of the board here. Andre Winston. I am a resident homeowner in McCady Park. And again, our concerns are that even when they show where the connectors are, they all run into the McCady Park community. So we're still funneling traffic into that one area. And as a member of the HOA board, our concern is that the traffic will funnel mostly into our community, unlike what we're seeing up here. We never saw that part of the plan before. But we do have some traffic concerns, and even in one of the reports on this detached documents about the life expectancy, well, our life expectancy decreases each morning when we hit Rock Quarry Road because of the traffic already. So what I'm asking is that there be a review of traffic and some kind of traffic solution placed at the Rock Quarry Interlock Road, so that we don't necessarily have a problem with the development as it is, but we do have a problem with the traffic that will be increased by additional residents moving into the area. So that's what I'm saying here. We do need to look at that and do need to come up with a solution, because I think it's actually poor planning traffic-wise, because that road is terrible right now. School buses cannot get out of the area. Residents cannot get out of the area. And unless I buy another car, anything below a 2000 car, I probably could not get out of the area without punching the gas and running across into Old Town, the new community, into the ditch. So we need to do some addressing of the traffic that will be presented increase. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Are there any other members of the public who wish to speak on this item? Seeing none, I'm going to move on to questions and comments from commissioners. I'm wondering if staff could address the traffic concern question that was just posed. And at what point a traffic study might be warranted or not for a product such as this.
Good morning. I'm Jason Myers with the City's Department of Transportation. The Raleigh Street Design Manual has certain thresholds for when a TI is required when there's a site plan submitted. This development might trip that, and if I did a little bit more research, I get a better sense of how close that might be. Without a site plan, I couldn't tell you for sure. It is certainly within the purview of Planning Commission or City Council to request one now, or to encourage a condition to ensure that one is done later, or one is done if a certain threshold is met, even if that threshold is different than the than those in the code. I do think that there are the things stated by Ms. Maddox are generally true and a part of the reason that we encourage and require in both our comp plan and UDO connectivity. There will be a new signal installed at a realigned Pearl Road with Barwell as a part of that project, which is about to go enter the construction phase. There is a lot of work happening on Rock Quarry just northwest of Interlochen. I think the Old Town frontage starts about here. It does not, I'm sorry, let me start again. I think it starts about here, maybe a little bit further. So it does not reach the point of interlock. I'm sorry, interlock, not interlocking. I don't know what could be done within the existing right-of-way at the intersection of Interlock and Rock Quarry. It is pretty constrained. There's some single-family houses on most of those corners, and making significant improvements would require that right-of-way. If there were development of those parcels into something more dense, then those site plans would make those improvements. Does that answer your question, Chair Fox?
That does, and to make the point, I am interested in some conditional language to ensure that a traffic analysis would be done if certain thresholds are met. Commissioner Lampman, do you have a question?
While you're up there, do you mind just showing where the new traffic signals are going to go? Is there one I'm sorry, I thought I heard you say one maybe at Pearl, but is there one at Interlochen and Rock?
There is not one at Interlock Drive, and I don't
Guidance
think
in
there
there.
is.
Will there be one?
Not unless there was a TIA that recommended it or a DOT project to do that. I believe, and others that are more familiar to the area could correct me if I'm wrong, that there may already be an signal at Pearl Road. I think a short-term improvement was done by DOT to put in a signal, but if that isn't been in place yet, the city will certainly put a traffic signal here and is realigning Pearl Road to line up with Barwell as a part of that project. There is one just off the map here at Jones Sausage, and I was about to check when I was called up if the site improvements and or TIA for Old Town might be putting one along one of the streets kind of in this area here to doodle very poorly. Apologize for that. Somewhere between Jones Sausage and Pearl. But there is not one with Old Town here because Old Town doesn't touch Interlock Drive. It's just a little bit northwest of there.
Okay. And it looks like from Google Maps that that's a no outlet. So if the community were to be proposed there and then the connectivity to Pearl Ridge and McCady Park, that provides two levels of.
Yeah, I mean, it's a little hard to see in the aerial photo, but Pearl is kind of in here or will be realigned in here. There's also this access point, and then this one. This entire area is all kind of connected, and there's an additional connection south of there. But Interlock and McCady Park is one point of access at this point. And as was stated earlier, there's two stubs here. The one in back is very close to some major utility lines. It may not be possible to get that crossed over the underneath the utilities there, but that's really up to a site plan review and what Duke Energy's policies and rights on those easements are. But there will be at least one point of connection through a subdivision.
And where would the traffic study take place? What area would that encompass?
Every time a TIA is triggered, there's kind of an engineering judgment of what is the area that would be influenced. And so generally the minimum is the first point of access to a major street, where a question of signalization or other changes to traffic control at that location would be the main point of the study. You know, there could be a need to study a internal intersection of two neighborhood streets in some cases, and if it's a large enough project, you start going further and further from those intersections. But it's really a question for an engineer. I would imagine this and this would be the two intersections that would be studied, and probably not more, but that's not something I'm qualified to answer.
Do we have any additional questions or comments? Go ahead.
Can the applicant please speak to what part or portion of the site, or show what portion of the site is not developable?
Yeah. Okay, so you see that utility line that going through. So that area not developable. And then there's another line that goes kind of at sort of like that, and they intersect, and it's a similar width. So it's so close to the northern line that area north of that horizontal utility corridor is not really enough room to develop. I think it may go all the way to the line. So you've got, and then here to the southwest portion, you've got some floodplain down here, and obviously a pond. So I think there's a good chance that the development stays in there.
Yeah.
There may be a little bit of, it may be that we can get a little bit of development over in this area, but it's not for sure. There has not been an engineering study done, and we've talked to a couple of different developers, but so we can't really tell you what the plan is right now. There's no development plan in place.
Mm-hmm.
I think the bulk of the development, though, is going to be to the east of that utility line.
So if you develop on the west side of the site, you would have to get access or permission from Duke Energy to cross the
Well,
the
you
easement.
can go vehicular crossing it, but you can't build anything within it.
Okay.
I think you could do a road crossing it. You would probably have the ability to get that approved, but as far as any kind of housing and stuff, you'd have to be outside of it. So it's going to depend on whether it makes sense, whether there's enough usable property in that southwest quadrant of the property to make it worth its while.
Question while you're on that item. I don't know if you're able to answer this, Isabel, or if this is a staff question. Are you able to use some of those unbuildable areas as open space, as an amenity?
Yeah, I think there will be a significant amount of open space on this development, just by virtue of the impediments that exist. So yes, I think absolutely. I mean, with 28 acres to do 170 units is pretty low density. And so, the property owner is certainly aware of the limitations of this site. But that's going to translate, I think, into some amenities for the ultimate homeowners. And I really do think that for McCady Park, it's really important that right now they have nothing other than interlock. That's the only way out. But once this road connection is made, they'll be able to come over here and then get out like that, which is if you have emergency vehicles or whatever, it's nice to have a second access. It's not nice, it's really critical to have a second access point. So I think it'll be a significant amenity to the neighborhood to have that second access point.
Thank you. Are there any additional questions or comments? Commissioner Bennett?
Thank you. Ms. Maddox, are you willing to provide a condition to address the comment from Parks about providing a bicycle and pedestrian public access easement from the internal network out to the western edge of the site to connect with the future planned Big Branch Greenway?
We're aware that was a question raised in the staff report. The reason we didn't include that is that side of the property is not going to be developed, and we're hoping not to have to get into that. And there are a couple of things. One, it's industrial property to our west. There's not a direct connection to the Greenway. You still have to go over some other property. And the fact that we don't really intend to be working in that western side of the site really at all. So we haven't done that. I mean, we can certainly take another look at that. It just didn't seem to make a lot of sense given the way this site sets up.
Perhaps that condition can itself be conditional if development is on that western side of the Duke utility easement, then such a connection to the Greenway would be considered.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's something we could certainly consider.
Okay.
Thank you.
Any additional questions or comments from commissioners?
I'd like to also comment to the neighbor's comment about traffic. Maybe a traffic TIA done prior or some kind of study, because there's a lot of pressure that's coming out on Cowan Interlock that would not be alleviated. Even by the addition of a road, it's still going to come out on Interlock. So I just want to make sure that we address the neighbor's concern about traffic.
Excellent. That was my concern as well. So it sounds like we're asking the applicant to come back with some additional conditions, perhaps requiring a traffic study if some threshold is met, acknowledging that this will also be reviewed during site plan, and then providing some language regarding the park's comment about bike and pedestrian public access easement.
Yeah, and I just on basic experience, I don't see this as meeting the TIA threshold at 170 units. But certainly it doesn't for a zoning case. For a site plan case, Jason?
So while I was back there, I checked, and the site plan triggers, this does not meet from a zoning case standpoint. The site plan triggers are 150 single-family homes or 300 townhomes or apartments. So 170 townhomes is kind of I think in the zone of not being required, but being similar-ish to 150 single-family homes. And just for everybody in the audience and on Commission's clarity, on national average basis, townhomes generate less traffic than a single-family home. They're usually smaller households. There's less trip shuttling kids around, and there may be more empty nesters or single individuals living in those than in larger single-family houses, which is why the trip generation is different.
So, Chair Fox, if you wanted us to commit to, I mean, I don't know why we would commit to, we'll do one if it's required, if it's, it's a requirement, but, you tell me what you're.
I'm actually thinking more in terms of some of the other language we've seen recently, limiting vehicular trips or providing a threshold by which a study would be completed. So basing it on trips, not necessarily on number of units.
And we could work with staff to determine what that threshold is.
Does that
I'm
meet your
fine
concern
as long
as well?
as it's done doing a site plan. If you're going to do it anyway, that's fine. But I just want to see some level of commitment that it will be done prior to development. It doesn't have to do with the rezoning. I understand that, but make sure we get it one done.
So I don't, I mean, I'm looking to my client, but I don't think we have a problem committing to doing a TIA if we exceed, and I'll have to work with Jason to see what that trip level is, but if it's somewhere in the, I just don't think we're going to probably hit it, but I think we can come up with some language there. Can you work with me on what that vehicular trip level is?
If I may, Chair Fox. So I don't believe that the development that's being talked about is likely to trigger a TIA through the code. It's really up to the commission and the applicant to decide what a lower threshold that might be appropriate for this particular case might be. And I don't know that I can, give that input. That's really a policy and and an applicant decision, understanding what the characteristics of that neighborhood are.
Excellent. So maybe the recommendation might be that staff work with the applicant outside of this meeting to talk about what those thresholds are.
Yeah, we can certainly discuss that with them and, give them some idea of what that might look like if there was a study, and bring an engineering perspective into that question a little bit too. So we're absolutely happy to do that.
I think that addressed my comments and Commissioner Mann's comments and Commissioner Bennett's as well.
Is that, just for clarity, are you saying you want to get us to a point where we're going to do one no matter what? Or, because I think when we're trying to work, if we don't know what the objective is in terms of trips, because the envision results, and I don't have that right in front of me, but I can't remember what that traffic generation was. Ira, do you have that?
For the trip generation?
Yeah, the 170.
Yeah, I think it was 52 a.m. peak trips and 78 p.m. peak trips.
Okay.
I don't know what that means, though.
If we stick to that, are you saying we need to do one anyway, or are you saying above that?
I'm going to defer to staff to provide some of the thresholds of what that might look like, and maybe we could talk about it outside of this particular meeting to get to the detailed nuance of what that number might be.
Okay.
But the question while you're up there still, does a September 13 meeting sound like an appropriate amount of time to give you, or would you like to extend that and look at the September, I believe it's 27th meeting?
I think we can be ready on the 13th.
Okay. Excellent. If there are no other comments, without objection, I'm going to recommend we defer this case to our September 13 meeting.
Thank you.
Move on to the next item, F.3. This is case Z2922 on East Millbrook and Paddock Drive. This is a request to rezone approximately 4.1 acres from office mixed-use 3 stories parking limited to neighborhood mixed-use 5 stories urban limited conditional use. Conditions prohibit some uses, put limits on certain operations, and put maximums on retail and office uses. We'll start with a presentation from Hannah Reckow.
Good morning. This case has the same deadline as all of your other new business today. So the site is 5 parcels at the intersection of Falls of Neuse Road and East Millbrook Road. Also has frontage on Paddock Drive. This is an area that's got some a range of mixed-use districts around the intersection and along Falls of Neuse Road, and then a large residentially zoned area to the north and west. Bigger picture of the aerial. So again, there's commercial and office uses along Falls of Neuse Road and at this intersection, and then a mix of residential scales in the area. Here's a zoom in of the site. Again, you can see the frontage, the 3 frontages that the site has. This aerial is showing kind of the most recent development, which were lower scale commercial buildings. Those still remain on the parcels that front on Millbrook Road, but the parcels fronting on Paddock Drive are the subject of an approved site plan that is currently being constructed. So it's an office building. And you can see that in some of these frontage views, that construction starting to go up along Falls of Neuse Road and Paddock Drive, and then some views from East Millbrook. So there are 4 zoning conditions. These prohibit a few uses normally permitted in NX and apply hours of operation to truck deliveries and hours of operation for personal service, restaurant, bar, and retail sales use. And then the zoning conditions also cap overall retail use and office use on the site. So the change here, a change of base district, slightly different mix of uses permitted, an increase in the maximum building height to 5 stories, a shift from a hybrid frontage to urban limited, and then some zoning conditions which are capping, again, that office and retail. The site has a higher walk score than average, likely because of the proximity of destinations and retail, a higher bike score than average. I think the flat topography of the area feeds into that, and then an average transit score for the city overall. So a lower cost of transportation in this area, a higher proximity to jobs than average. And there's 2 bus routes that serve the site along Falls of Neuse and East Millbrook Road, 60 and 30-minute service. And then the request would increase the housing entitlement on the site, permit a variety of housing types, allow smaller units, have access to transit, but there are no guaranteed subsidized units in this request. So demographic analysis shows a slightly higher low-income population in the area compared to the citywide average, but other demographic metrics are lower than the citywide average, and the census did not have sufficient data to track change in rental costs in the area. So future land use map on the site is neighborhood mixed use, which is envisioning neighborhoods serving commercial uses as well as retail use, residential uses. So the requested district neighborhood mixed use is consistent with that designation. And then on the urban form map, Falls of Neuse Road is a transit emphasis corridor, and the recommendation here is to balance modes in the urban form, and urban limited allows that flexibility, so it's consistent with the transit emphasis corridor. And the case is consistent overall with the comprehensive plan. Aside from the future land use map consistency, there's also policies on compact development, the mix of uses around a node, and managing some of the impacts of commercial use, as well as meeting some of the design guidelines of bringing buildings up to the street. There is one inconsistent policy, building height transitions. This is one that recommends that in areas where a mixed use area is across the street from a residential area, and it's a sort of smaller street, that those buildings should be 3 stories along that frontage. The request would allow 5 stories along that the whole site. So it is inconsistent with this one policy, and that summarizes the staff presentation. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Reckow. Next, we're going to move on to the applicant presentation. The applicant and those in support have a total of 10 minutes to speak.
Good morning, Commissioners. Molly Stewart, Morningstar Law Group, here on behalf of the applicant. This site is located at the major intersection of Millbrook and Falls of Neuse. As you heard from Ms. Reckow, Falls of Neuse is a transit emphasis corridor. There's commercial use located on 3 corners of the intersection, with multifamily to the northeast. This site has been home to commercial buildings for more than 50 years. And the owner is seeking to modestly increase the permitted number of stories to better match the growth in the population served since that time, and to provide the flexibility to achieve mixed uses on this site. I'd like to note that the site is adjacent to 3 residential parcels to the west, and neighborhood transitions would apply along that boundary, as the UDO contemplates to address exactly that situation. Given the overwhelming consistency of this request with adopted city policies, I'd like to conclude my presentation and introduce Steve Young. He's here on behalf of the owner of 2 of those 3 residential properties adjacent to the site.
Good morning. My name's Steve Young, and I'm here today in support of Quail Commons Development and their rezoning request. As manager and family member of the LLC that owns 2 homes behind this site, we view this project as a positive step forward. We've been impressed with the design of the current building under construction, both from the elevation side on the front as well as in the rear. We see this as a positive investment for all the surrounding area, a dynamic, appealing design with services that make sense to the community, that address the fast approaching growth in a forward-thinking manner. We believe the intersection of Millbrook Road and Falls of the Neuse has tremendous potential to someday be a showcase of what smart and well thought out development can look like. We see what is occurring at Quail Commons, East Millbrook, as a critical step towards this end. Thank you.
I'd like to reserve the remainder of our time for rebuttal. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. Are there any other members of the public, anyone here who wishes to speak in opposition to this case? Please come forward. We limit the total time to 10 minutes for the public to speak. If you'd like to designate a speaker or split the time up appropriately, please go ahead.
Good morning. My name's Jill Barrett. I am a neighbor off of Saddle Court, right across the street from the proposed development. I oppose the rezoning request due to insufficient information currently provided. I know there is no site development plan, but even without a plan, there are still several inconsistent items noted in the staff report that have not been addressed by the applicant. Some of these items include the non-conforming requested building or parking structure height of 5 stories. The impact of increased traffic onto the neighborhood streets as cut-throughs is still an open question. My hope today is that the staff analysis is reviewed in full and the applicant will be encouraged to work with the community on additional conditions for best use of the space, including the building height step-downs and setbacks and traffic management. I am for good development with a plan that is reasonable, sensible, and adds value to Raleigh as a whole and directly impacted community. My neighbors will now share additional concerns. Thank you for your time.
Hello, Michael Valentino, Saddle Court, 27609. Thank you, and I appreciate the opportunity to share some of our concerns. Friends of Quail Meadow is for sensible development. A prominent real estate agent once told me they aren't making any more land. We love that Raleigh is growing rapidly, and now more than ever, we need properly planned developments to make the best use of our limited natural resources. We have the best planners in the world right here. They know listening to the community is the key to every successful plan. Great planners show respect to the people and the existing character of Raleigh. The applicant hasn't listened. I understand the comprehensive plan is a dynamic document, but an accumulation of knowledge with thousands of hours of research to share best practices to complement the UDO. It doesn't always have hard numbers that are quantitative, since it addresses the softer, more qualitative issues. The only way to predict the future is to create it, and the comprehensive plan does just that with guidelines. The plan doesn't tell us what to do or even how to do it, but it shares generally accepted best practices. Matching what was envisioned for this neighborhood by the city planners allows a significant increase in the density over what is in use today and takes advantage of the existing entitlements. The applicant's self-imposed condition to restrict retail would likely result in a net neutral, best case, or a loss of retail for our walkable neighborhoods. The request is not in the best interest of the community. It appears they have painted themselves into a corner by developing half of the property without consideration for the whole. If the rezoning is approved, the applicant has no plan to increase the density on half of this relatively small property, the 3 parcels along Paddock. So why request it? The applicant appears to either be hiding something or simply wasting everyone's time. I suggest the Planning Commission consider decoupling the request to rezone the parcels along Paddock or simply deny the entire request. We welcome the opportunity to work with the applicant to develop a plan along Millbrook and Falls. It was my pleasure sharing our community concerns. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Barnett Adler, and I live at 5208 Saddle Court. I work in the design and building industry, and I am not opposed to development either. I'm very happy to see the new construction that has happened on one of these 2 parcels, and if I may, this picture that you're looking at does not reflect the current state of the property. There is a new building that is 3 stories and a parking deck that's in this basic location about right there. And so the area that is here is currently listed as where they're going to have ground level parking for this building, with all of the current accesses for entering this property now that have been on Falls of Neuse. All of that traffic is coming into this location right here, both through construction and through the planned development that's going to happen on that property. They're asking to increase the density to 5 stories on both of these parcels. This one has just been developed as a big 3-story building. It's going to be a major expense to tear that down and to add a 5. So the only reason they would want to do that is to be able to increase the height of a structure on this property that abuts single-family residential properties on the other side of Paddock Drive. Right now, we are already experiencing a tremendous increase in traffic, and we don't have tenants, we don't have vendors accessing, the building as will happen as the new building construction would happen. And it would appear, again, we don't have but so much specific information because of what we've learned in the neighborhood meetings, that they're planning to continue to use this access on Paddock for a lot of the traffic that would go into the buildings on both of these locations. And so obviously this area is very difficult to get traffic off of Millbrook, so there's going to be limited placement where traffic can come in. I have a picture I would love to show you of what we're currently dealing with just the traffic right now, and we're looking at 4 times that in this new development if it's asked to happen. If there's a way for us to ask for a lot more specifics about traffic access and make sure that those things are handled so that the UDO concern about neighborhood integrity is upheld, and we can make sure that all of this area back here, because of the strong traffic on both these major streets, and there are no cut-throughs, that we're not facing this neighborhood back here of taking all the traffic from this property, this commercial property that is currently should be being accessed through to the 3 major streets on that corner. I would really appreciate your consideration of that for the overall integrity of the existing neighborhood, and figure out a way that development can happen, but the neighbors adjacent aren't blocked into their houses, and we can all be happy. Thank you.
I'm Kevin Gard, Standard Trail 27612. Thank you, Planning Commission members and city staff, for this opportunity to speak. The neighbors of Quail Meadows support redevelopment of the 4-acre site, but they want a development that maintains balance with the neighborhood and the surrounding communities, does not increase non-residential traffic on Quail Meadows streets, and provides new services, businesses, and opportunities for local employment. Z2922 proposal currently does not address 1 and 2. We have had 2 neighborhood meetings with over 100 topics of inquiry, and the conditions are the same as they were presented at the second neighborhood meeting. I've included in the Planning Commission information packet a memo detailing the many specific concerns, policies, and issues that are not currently addressed by the proposal, and there is a letter from a adjoining neighbor outlining their specific condition requests. The site adjoins 3 residential lots and faces 4 residential lots. On the north side, excuse me, the site adjoins 3 residential lots and directly faces 4 residential lots on the north side of Paddock Drive. And you can see how tightly coupled the 4 neighborhood yield streets are: Paddock, Hearth, Fireside, and Saddle Court. Please note how little space there is when there are cars parked on the street. This is why these streets are designated as neighborhood yield streets. And according to the Raleigh Street Design Manual 2018 update, a neighborhood yield street serves only up to 40 residential units. There's no precedence for a 4 or 5 story mixed-use zoning site that adjoins low-density residential and shares neighborhood yield streets. Outside a growth or mixed-use center, there are no 4 or 5 story mixed-use zonings sharing neighborhood streets along Wake Forest Road and Falls and Noose Road from north of the Midtown Growth Center all the way to Durant Road north of 5540. I just wanted to illustrate the height impact to an adjoining residential yard for between the 3-story 50-foot limit and the 80-foot requested 5-story zoning. And I don't have time to explain to you the streets, the neighborhood yield streets, and all the different ways that traffic accesses this site because of the traffic congestion and the changes. There are changes coming to the Quail Corners shopping center that will realign traffic and put in barriers to leave traffic or impede traffic accessing Millbrook Road from this site. That needs to be reviewed. So where are we at with this case? By rights, 3-story development would be a significant site upgrade that also maintains balance with the neighborhood and minimizes non-residential traffic impact to the neighborhood streets. We'd like to hear from City DOT regarding the changing traffic patterns, cross-access issues through the neighborhood, and how of these neighborhood yield streets that with a 40-unit maximum capacity could serve this site. The applicant has stated there's no development plan. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, sir. Just want to let you know when you all send emails and information, we do read those. So please know that we've seen your comments. Thank you very much. Going to move now to questions and comments from commissioners. Does anyone want to start off with a question or a comment?
I have a question for Ms. Stewart. What is the intention of the cap on the retail and the office square footage?
Sure. As we heard, the primary neighbor concern that we've heard throughout this process has been traffic, and that use cap condition is intended to limit traffic.
And will that would there be a TIA that would be required at this rezoning if it were not for that condition?
I don't know about specifically the retail, but the condition as a whole, yes.
Okay.
That's right.
Thank you. While you're up there, Mr., I was going to ask, the only inconsistency I'm noting is the height transition along Paddock. Has the applicant considered providing a step back or just adjusting setbacks to soften that?
Sure. We saw that noted in the staff report that came out last week, and we have started a conversation about that. We haven't concluded that conversation at this point.
Okay. Would you like additional time to be able to continue that conversation with the applicant?
Well, we'd, of course, be happy to move along. We could also take time and discuss that.
Okay. Commissioner Mann?
Yeah, there was one comment made by a neighbor that kind of alluded to tearing down the new construction of the 3-story building. I just wanted to hear back from you and the applicant to make sure that that new building would remain and not be tore down with this rezoning.
Right. So there would be absolutely no plan to tear down that building. As the neighbors noted, it is still under construction. It is quite far along in construction, so it would not make sense to tear that down. However, it also hasn't been excluded from the request in part to avoid having a zoning boundary through the site and to allow, as there's no development plan for the rest of the site, to allow sort of that larger scale planning.
Are there any additional? Commissioner Bennett, did you have a question?
I'm wondering if Mr. Myers might address the neighbor questions about traffic on the neighborhood streets and I was trying to type it as they were saying it, the changing traffic patterns.
So I was trying to do a little bit of research to make sure I knew what was, and I'm right here. So I think that what was being mentioned, I'm going to ask Hannah to help me find, there we go. Never mind, it's right there. It's a little hard to see through the tree canopy, but I'll draw the street network here for everybody's benefit. That continues, and then there's another street here, and that does connect to Falls of the Neuse. So the shopping center here is adding on in this area and is making this a right in, right out to basically improve the safety there of that intersection. And I think what the what the resident was stating was that would prevent somebody from using this street to turn left. Turning left from this location may be a little bit difficult. So getting out of this site in a way that allows you to head north on Falls of the Neuse would be a little bit of a challenge. I think that was a part of what was being discussed. The other thing that I'll add, and I just double checked for myself to make sure, the site plan that's approved recently for this, that's under construction now, is adding a sidewalk along their frontage, but is not widening the street beyond the neighborhood yield standard. If there was another site plan and there was additional density, there may be a requirement that some portion of this would be widened to be able to help accommodate curbside uses and two-way traffic consistently. So that's not something that is necessarily locked in along their site frontage, but of course, the neighborhood is what it is at this point. There is a sidewalk gap, I'll note, that will remain about there, I think in front of one lot, to get from the rest of the neighborhood sidewalk network to the sidewalk network being built by the approved site plan, and that's something that theoretically could be addressed. I think there's sufficient right-of-way to put that in, and it may be something the city will start looking at from our microgap program. Are there any other questions about transportation? Did I answer the ones that were being asked?
I believe so. Thank you, Mr. Myers. Any additional questions or comments for either staff or the applicant? Commissioner Dattell?
Thanks, Chair Fox. I know there are a couple conditions in there about hours of deliveries and hours of operation, and I did notice that they were different from, I think, what some of the neighbors had been asking for. I'm curious if the applicant would be willing to sort of work with them on those, or if that might help with some of their concerns.
Certainly. I don't recall hearing a specific request other than to look at the relatively recent CX zoning across the street, which is what we did in this case.
Commissioner Laitman?
Do you have an estimated completion date for the construction that's underway today?
One moment, I'll confirm.
Sure, thanks.
While Molly's confirming that answer, are there any other questions of staff that we might have, or the applicant for that matter?
I don't have a question, it's more of a comment. I do see that, like diagonally across the street, it's zoned 5 stories, but that's surrounded by other mixed-use zoning. So my concern with this one is that it's right adjacent to the low-scale residential. But I guess Ms. Stewart said you're willing to, you're having conversations right now about the height.
That's correct.
Okay.
So there are kind of two sides there. Right on the west, there would be the neighborhood transition that applies, and then to the north across the street, that's the ongoing conversation there.
Okay. That's my primary concern.
Okay. So it sounds like, go ahead.
I can answer Commissioner Lampman's question. The current building under construction is expected to be completed, sort of core and shell, by approximately Thanksgiving.
Thank you.
Okay. Any additional follow-up required? Okay. All right. So it looks like we're going to be working with the applicant here to come back to a future meeting after they've had additional time to consider some height transitions along the paddock edge. I believe our first meeting in September is quite full, so that might be is it September 27? Is the appropriate 13th is fine? Is that? Then I'll ask the applicant if there's do you have enough time for the first meeting in September?
Yes.
Okay. I see you haunting in the backgrounds.
I apologize, Chair Fox. I need to correct myself on one thing, just kind of a matter of fact. I understood and wouldn't have been surprised to see that a median was being installed here with that site plan. That is not in fact the case. There will be left in and out access of that street. There is a short section of median being installed here to restrict lefts in and out of the driveway that exists behind. So it changes some of the traffic patterns, but doesn't change the access into the neighborhood. I just want to make sure that stood for the record.
Thank you. Does that information require any follow-up from any commissioners? Do you have any follow-up questions? Okay. Without objection, then, we're going to defer this case to our September 13 meeting. Okay, moving on to the next item, which is, I believe, item F.4. Is that where we are? Case Z3122 on Harrington Street. This is a request to rezone approximately 0.13 acres from downtown mixed-use 5 stories urban limited to downtown mixed-use 20 stories urban limited conditional use. Conditions prohibit certain uses and require a structural survey for buildings over 5 stories. We will start with a staff presentation from Ira Mabel.
Chair Fox, before we get into it, without objection, I need to be recused from this case.
Excellent. We take a quick vote by show of hands. Those in support of allowing Commissioner Mann recusal. Any opposed? Okay.
Okay, great. No new information, so I'll skip right to the next slide. So this request is on the edge of our current DX zoning from downtown. And you can see the other sort of mixed and transitional districts in the downtown West Gateway area. So this is the site roughly halfway between Red Hat and Boylan Heights. Harrington Street is this one, which is a dead end there. This is an image of the site, especially in reference to the Fairweather building. Some policy guidance from the Downtown West Gateway Plan, which is showing this site in the Convention Center District. I will show on the urban form map later with in relation to the equitable development on transit guidance here. So just a lot of different height guidance going on in this particular part of town. So as mentioned, 2 zoning conditions, the first prohibiting some uses, and the second one is a 2-parter requiring a structural survey of the Fairweather and also installation of vibration sensors should a building taller than 5 stories be constructed. The envision analysis is definitely not a number you would associate with 20 stories usually, but the site is relatively small for that height compared to other 20-story requests you might have seen recently. So it does score pretty high on the transit. I mean, the next couple of these slides are going to be sort of the downtown standard, pretty high transit access. Quite a number of bus routes right adjacent. Would allow a lot or more units in the smallest, all range of units permitted. And then again is, in the original Christmas plan and all of the implications for property that is platted that old, in most of the other downtown cases. So request is consistent. There is central business district future land use map here, sort of mirroring the zoning in place. And the urban form map is showing, it is in the downtown and the frequent transit area. It is I think over a quarter mile from the nearest BRT stop on Western, but not by much. So a lot of transit going on relatively close by as well. So consistent with the plan overall and future land use map and urban form, is inconsistent with, with some policies about infill. Again, that's just a departure from the existing built condition of this part of downtown West Gateway. And I'd be happy to answer any questions before you hear from the applicant.
Okay, next we're going to move on to the applicant presentation. The applicant and those in support have a total of 10 minutes to speak.
Did you send me a presentation? Okay. Sorry, I'll double check.
Good morning, Chair, members of Planning Commission, Worth Mills with Longleaf Law Partners. I am joined by John Grease, structural engineer with Giles Flythe, Jonathan Best, a development manager with Samick Corporation, and Veronica Creech, Vice President of Economic Development and External Engagement at St. Augustine's University. The rezoning from DX5 to DX20UL would continue the recent and planned overall development of this downtown Raleigh block within a quarter mile of Raleigh Union Station. We've met with the adjacent Fairweather condominium residents and have offered zoning conditions to the best of our abilities related to the concerns that they shared with us. This request is consistent with the future land use map, the urban form map, and the comprehensive plan overall, and is reasonable and in the public interest. This slide shows the current zoning of the property and the surrounding areas. I do want to note a couple of different redevelopment projects going on today. So right here on this circle is plans submitted, an ASR approved for a 20-story tower there at 328 and 320 West South Street. And here, a recently filed site plan for a 5 and 12-story building with the 12 stories located along West Cabarrus Street. Just highlighting that not only within this area, but this specific block is seeing significant redevelopment, and that potential is being recognized today. Scroll through here. The site and all of the properties nearby are within the downtown section of the urban form map, which calls for urban frontage and greater pedestrian mobility. The site is also within a frequent transit area, meaning that it's within a quarter mile from a planned transit station. The transit station with regard to this property is Raleigh Union Station. City policies recommend significant development within these frequent transit areas to capitalize on that access to the city's bus system. Based on that frequent transit area and the downtown or central business district future land use map, we believe that a rezoning to 20 stories is consistent with both of those policies and is a reasonable request in and of itself. Again, the property being within a quarter mile of Raleigh Union Station, the hub of the city's planned bus services, only further calls for greater density, greater concentration of building height, office space, residential units around that Union Station. And then going to our zoning conditions. Again, we met with the Fairweather neighbors outside of the neighborhood meeting process on July 26th. There were concerns about the structural integrity of their building, as well as access to and from Harrington Street from that parking deck at the Fairweather. In response to those comments, we are requiring that we complete and submit a structural survey of the Fairweather building prior to receiving any building permits. That condition is subject to the Fairweather's approval, but assuming that approval is granted, we would complete a full structural survey of that building. Second structural integrity condition is the requirement to place vibration monitoring equipment at 3 points. At the southeast property line, the southwest property line, and then that northernmost point of our shared boundary line with the Fairweather. Those would be in place and in effect during all periods of construction to ensure that the Fairweather is protected and that the adjacent construction of 520 South Harrington is not materially damaging that building in any way. I would like to now call up Ms. Creech and Mr. Grice, or excuse me, CJ Mann, to speak more about the project. Thank you.
Hey, good afternoon, folks. Veronica Creech, Vice President of Economic Development and Community Engagement at St. Augustine's University. Great to be with you today. On behalf of our president, Dr. Christine Johnson McPhail, and the Falcon family, to include our Board of Trustees, our more than 300 faculty and staff, more than 12,000 alumni, In our fourth consecutive semester of growth, more than 1,200 students, we want to show and share our support for this project. As we all know, Raleigh is a great place to live, learn, work, and play, and we continue to grow in all four of those areas. With this project, we will greatly amplify each of these areas, and for St. Augustine's, Shaw, and other learning institutions, this project will allow for expanded, lifelong learning everywhere, and it grows Raleigh's commitment to equitable economic development. For example, St. Augustine's has not been invited by any of our developers to date that we have on record to participate in the growth in downtown. This project would allow us some downtown space, downtown access, and we can even see satellite classes, lab space, and engagement through this new expanded district for St. Augustine's.
Thank you, Commission. Many of you guys all know me. Name is CJ Mann. Address is 8315, 8317, Six Forks Road, Raleigh, 27615. I just want to thank Worth and Veronica for their comments. And I just want to follow up and add a brief overview of myself and why we're deciding to rezone our property located at 520 South Harrington Street in Raleigh. I'm a Raleigh guy, born and raised. I've literally lived in every district in Raleigh, A through E, throughout my lifetime. The lifeblood of Raleigh, my city, runs through my veins. I love this city as much as anyone who has ever lived here. Over the course of my lifetime, I've witnessed drastic changes with regards to demographics and development types. I understand and appreciate the need for our city to redevelop because of our rapid population growth, but on the other hand, it saddens me to witness the loss of minority-owned businesses in our city due to gentrification and the temptation of monetary gain due to the pressures of redevelopment. As you can see from the EJ screen mentioned in the staff report, many of the historic African-American owned businesses, churches, community-based organizations, and residential homes within a quarter-mile radius of our site have been relocated, demolished, or out of business due to redevelopment in this district. As Worth stated, currently under construction is a 20-story mixed-use development at the corner of Dawson and South Street on land where historic Victory Tabernacle Church sat. In fact, there were two historic African-American homes located on land that the Fairweather condos currently sit that were once owned by prominent African-American business leaders in the early 1900s. In fact, also the land that the Sam Jones barbecue restaurant sits on was previously an auto mechanic body shop owned by my relatives. 4 years ago, when we purchased 520 South Harrington Street, we wanted our business to have a downtown presence. We purchased our property with this rich history in mind. We want to be able to provide services, amenities, programs, opportunities to the entire community. We also want to help revitalize the African-American economic community in the downtown area. As Worth stated, we want this to be a mixed-use development with office, retail, and residential spaces. More importantly, we want this space to serve the community. We want to have a space to host workforce development programs for our surrounding neighbors. Ideally, we would like to partner with local higher education institutions such as Shaw University and St. Augustine's University so they can have a downtown presence with office space, incubator spaces, and residences for their professional faculty and staff. All of these mentioned programs and uses require a density on our site such as ours, which is why we are respectfully asking to be rezoned to downtown mixed-use 20 stories. Lastly, I want to reiterate from the staff report that this rezoning is consistent with the future land use map, consistent with the urban form map, and consistent with the 2030 comp plan. Thank you.
Chair Fox will reserve the remaining 52 seconds for response.
I have that on the record now. Next, we're going to move on. Are there any members of the public who wish to speak on this item?
Good morning. My name is Suzanne Prince, and I reside at the Fairweather, 523 South Harrington Street. And I'm here on behalf of myself and also many of my neighbors who also live at the Fairweather. And if those folks would like to stand up just so you know who they are. We had several that also couldn't be here today. First of all, I want to thank the developer for taking the time to meet with us. I do believe that Mr. Mann does have a willingness to be a good neighbor, and he has shown through the zoning condition with the vibrational issues that we had and the concerns that we had, he has shown that he is willing to work with us on that, and so we do appreciate him offering that up as a condition. As we also noted from Worth, and we have had some discussions back and forth. I did have a discussion with him yesterday. We are concerned about access onto South Harrington Street. That is a very, very short street. There's only really 4 properties there. And then there is no way to turn around. When you get back there with both parking on both sides of that street, you've literally got to back down out of the street to get back down the street. So that is a problem with access. We've got about 35 people that park in that particular deck, and there's no other way for them to get out. We also have 2 residents that front onto South Harrington Street. They have walk-up units, and there is no other access for them except onto Harrington. And it's not just a convenience thing that we are concerned about. We're also concerned about emergency vehicles being able to get in there should there be a problem at the Fairweather, either on that side of the building or for those 2 residents that are back there. I would like to see a zoning condition attached to this rezoning request that would have us be able to have access at all times to our parking deck on South Harrington, and also to provide some sort of emergency vehicle access. I know with 5 stories we're still going to run into some problems in that respect, but 20 stories with a crane and bringing in those sorts of things, all the equipment that has to be brought in for that kind of development is going to also make it worse than it would be for 5 stories. The other concern that we have, obviously, is for the 20 stories. 5 stories was part of the 2014 citywide rezoning. When we moved here, we all understood that was going to be 5 stories, and we were okay with that. Seemed to be in keeping with that dead-end street. We have five stories where we are. Next door, of course, is 5 stories. 5 stories with the adjacent property owners where there was a paint company. And then on the corner, they do have a corner on Harrington and on Cabarrus, and that's 12 stories. And that seems about all that block can really handle. This may be consistent with the future land use plan and the comp plan, but it is not consistent with this block. The current zoning of DX5 seems sufficient given the challenges that are on Harrington Street. I thank you for your time and for your consideration of our concerns.
Thank you, ma'am. Please come forward. There are more members of the public.
Thank you, and I appreciate the opportunity to address the commission. My name is Ann Burke, and I live at the Fairweather. And if you don't know what that looks like, the Fairweather is kind of cut in an L-shaped building. This presented rezoning for 20 stories is going to be literally 5 to 6 feet from my balcony. And when we bought our unit there, we were assured, because the zoning at the time was 5 stories, that it would remain 5 stories. And we would not have purchased had we known that this was going to be a 20-story, potentially a 20-story building. And it really and truly will impact our quality of life. I believe in development. I live in a downtown development project. I appreciate it. But in keeping with what Suzanne has just said, this rezoning request is not in keeping with what else is on our block. So I appreciate the opportunity to bring that to your attention.
I'm not going to be speaking, but we have prepared a handout for each of the commissioners that you can take with you, and it includes includes photographs at street level, so that you can understand what the access to Harrington Street, South Harrington Street looks like, the fact that there's no possibility of changing what is now a condition as a dead end, and also the physical constraints with relationship to where our building is, where the proposed construction site is, to the dead end. So I'm going to ask if you could please hand this out and take a look at it at your leisure, so that you can give some good consideration and thought to our request for this to be somewhat deferred and possibly changed.
Thank you, sir. Are there any additional members of the public who'd wish to speak on this item? No? I'll give commissioners a little bit of time to be able to look at the handout, and then we will shift to questions and comments from commissioners.
Chair Fox, I did want to use those 52 seconds.
Bring it.
This is Jonathan Best with Samet Corp.
Jonathan Best, Samet Corporation, 5430 Way Park Boulevard, Suite 110. Samet, we construct all types of high-rise buildings in downtown areas. Currently, we're working with the city of Charlotte on 2 high-rises where rezoning was needed. You know, things that we can put in place are what we call catch-all debris, where we net around the entire property to catch the debris coming from the site, you know, to ensure no other property gets the debris coming from construction. Also, we have to work with municipalities on keeping, you know, right-of-ways open. So, you know, we will have 24/7 access to the parking decks, you know, whether we have to have traffic control, have barriers out, you know, that would be something we would work with the municipality, also the Fairweather condo owners, and also the applicant on making sure we have the access. In the event we have deliveries, there'll be no big trucks, no semi-18-wheelers. There will be, you know, box trucks, traffic control. If someone needs to come in and out, we'll make sure we keep those paths open.
Thank you, sir. To move on to questions and comments from commissioners, I wanted to start out, maybe this might be a question for Mr. Myers, I don't know. The status of Harrington Street it's unusual in this condition in that it's a dead end, and connecting it is virtually impossible, I believe, because of the grade separation. I didn't know there were plans to do that, or
No, ma'am.
or if there would be a requirement for at least like a hammerhead construct at the end, or
I don't know. The hammerhead question would have been resolved if it was required with the development of the Fairweather. That would have been the site that maybe would have required one, and I can't speak to what would have triggered it and why it wasn't. The other, just for, it may be in the handouts you have, the other side of the street is a Duke Energy substation. So that's some of the power distribution system into downtown Raleigh. For the time being, that's infrastructure, theoretically, that could be developed some point in the future. Harrington Street is, I believe, about a 41-foot wide street. It's the same as most of our downtown, more minor streets, and there's generally parking on both sides. I can imagine that as a part of maintaining safe access, that on-street parking may go away in whole or in part. That kind of management of the right-of-way through construction is something that my colleagues handle very carefully, make sure there's pedestrian access, make sure there's emergency access. In more extreme cases, there's things like flagging where it's so narrowed down to a one-way street and there's either a traffic signal or, you know, somebody out there with a flag to make sure that the 2 head-on cars don't approach. The construction at Raleigh Union Station's Phase 2 right now is an example of that. And I think in order to maintain some curb space on that block, City Council recently turned it to a one-way street temporarily to help address some of the conflicts. That's a little bit busier scenario here, but it is something that we take very seriously. And I don't think there isn't anything about this site that concerns me in terms of being able to continue that access. And to very quickly answer your question, the reason I think that this was disconnected is that the grade of Lenora Street was lowered at some point to get underneath the railroad, and Harrington wasn't lowered with it. And so there's some steps and a wall there, and that's the way it is. And it's at least connected for pedestrians who are able-bodied.
thank you, that's helpful. It's somewhat out of order, but you didn't actually take your time. So if you want to put a minute on the clock, go right ahead.
I appreciate that. Thank you very much. My name is Sid Bernstein. I am also a resident of the Fairweather, and I am not an expert on either urban development or traffic and DOT issues. However, what I think makes this situation unique is the fact that the property we're discussing is 0.13 acres. And I'm trying to wonder imagine how trucks that carry in steel, other building materials, where those materials could be possibly inventoried in ways that would keep access to our community open at all times. Having a crane literally a few feet from our building, how do you erect that? How do you do all of these things? How do you do the construction on a dead-end street where there's really no way for the trucks to turn around, and there's only one way they can get in, one way they can get out, and then there, as I mentioned, with 0.13 acres, there's no place to inventory building materials.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for your comments, sir. Do we have questions or comments from commissioners? Commissioner Bennett?
I have a few, but let me ask this one now. I don't know if this is for, oh, I'm sorry.
I was going to offer a response to the neighbors' questions, but you got them.
We'll just wait until there's a question. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mann.
I'm wondering when was the Fairweather built? And if I'm wondering if anyone, staff, Jason, I don't know if you were around then, were there issues at that time when it was being built with cranes and the trucks coming in, being able to turn around? And I mean, I'm thinking, I'm jotting down some of the concerns, and I'm wondering if they happened then, how were they handled?
I don't think that I'm an expert in construction management by any means, but the Fairweather has frontage on West Street and the slope along Lenore Street, so there is a lot more access there. I do think that construction here might be challenging, but they are not allowed to use the right-of-way, and the city can change how we manage the right-of-way to ensure safe access continues. So I think it's a question of the applicant of how would they intend to build lay down and those sorts of things, because the city's going to protect the interest of the right-of-way to provide access to everybody, including the residents of the Fairweather.
At what that doesn't sound like, is that something we would address here during the rezoning, or it's something that would happen later on when there's a construction plan?
Yeah, I mean, traffic control is a really significant part of our site plan review process, and it's not a part I have a professional, understanding of, and can really speak to. If it's important, we can bring some of my colleagues who do that work in to answer some questions about the specific site. But the right-of-way is the city's to control and purview, and it can't be used for laydown without special permits, and we won't allow those permits if it creates a safety issue for somebody else.
Okay, thanks.
Are there additional questions or comments? Personally, I'm not identifying any significant inconsistencies with the comp plan, although I will acknowledge there are reasonable concerns about the technical difficulty of constructing in a tight urban lot. I do believe there's mechanisms to control that. If we don't have any additional questions or comments from commissioners, I'd either like to entertain a motion for either a recommendation to vote out or go ahead, Commissioner Otwell.
I'm confident of the city staff's ability to handle these construction issues at the time of the site planning and construction management, and I'd like to move to recommend adoption of the proposed consistency statement dated August 30th, 2022, contained in the agenda materials, and to recommend approval of the zoning amendment.
Thank you. And Commissioner Bennett offers a second. So that's Commissioner Otwell offered a motion to approve Z3122. Commissioner Bennett offers a second. I would also like to add that I'm excited that St. Aug's gets to have a footprint closer to downtown, and I'd like to support that development. But if there's no other discussion or debate on the merits of the motion, by show of hands, those in favor? Any opposed? That motion passes unanimously. Moving on to the next item, which is case Z3522 on Crest Road, Varsity Drive, College View Avenue. This is a request to rezone approximately 4.19 acres from residential 10 with special residential parking overlay district to residential mixed-use 7 stories urban limited frontage with zoning conditions. Conditions prohibit the cemetery use. We will start with a staff presentation from JP Mansell.
Good morning, Commission. As Chair Fox mentioned, this is a request to rezone just over 4 acres.
I'm sorry to cut you off. There's some discussion going on in the audience that we can't hear.
If there's additional discussion that applicants and the public would like to have in the lobby, that would be fantastic. Okay, thank you.
It's a request to rezone just over 4 acres from R10 with a special residential parking overlay district to residential mixed use 7 stories with a urban limited frontage and conditions. The Planning Commission deadline for action is October 29th. Looking at the zoning, so to the north is NC State's South Campus, which is zoned office and residential mixed use 3 and 5 stories. South of the campus is a mix of R10 and residential mixed use up to 3 stories. Here's an aerial of the site. So again, the built form south of the campus is a mix of moderate and medium scale residential, and the South Campus includes some fraternity housing and other university associated buildings. Here's a few views of the site. So this site has frontage on 3 different streets. So the first is looking north on Crest. The site is occupied by some low scale housing, and you can see that on Crest, and also looking south on Varsity. And then again, looking north on College View, there is some existing low scale housing. There is one proposed condition which prohibits the cemetery use. Looking at the increase in entitlement, number of units would go up from 62 to 367, and then the residential mixed-use district would allow up to 4,000 square feet of retail or office. The site has a similar walk score to the city average, but higher bike and transit score. It has lower transportation costs and higher job proximity than the city average, likely due to the proximity to NC State, which is a major job center. There's currently 2 routes serving the site, both with 30-minute service, so Route 11 and Route 12. And there is also the Wolf Line, which is the NC State shuttle service that is also open to the public, that also serves the site as well. The request would add to the housing supply but does not include subsidized units. It permits a variety of housing types and would allow smaller units and lots than the citywide average, and it is within walking distance of a bus rapid transit station, or future bus rapid transit station. The census tract for the site includes a higher low-income population than the city average, and housing costs in this area have changed similar to the city average, so approximately 20% increase in the last 5 years to the median rent. The requested district is consistent with the higher scale residential future land use map designation, which it envisions a slightly taller residential use that would scale down to sort of the adjacent future land use map residential future land use map designations. The urban limited frontage that's included in the request is also consistent with the frequent transit area designation, which would recommend a urban frontage. Overall consistent with the comprehensive plan, consistent policies reflect the consistency with the future land use map, adding some additional residential uses in a area that is walking distance to a future bus rapid transit station. There is a policy 10.3 that recommends limiting retail uses in future land use map designations where it calls for that, which is consistent with the residential mixed use zoning district. And then it's consistent with the greenhouse gas reduction policy, so adding more housing within walking distance of transit, adding more housing, and also consistent with the urban design policy around frontage. There is one inconsistent policy that reflects the difference between the proposed height that would be allowed by the district and sort of the existing height of the surrounding area. So the 7 stories is significantly taller than most of the surrounding development, which is generally 1 to 2 stories. Your deadline for action again is October 29th, and there's a couple meetings listed there before that, and happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Next, we're going to move on to the applicant presentation. The applicant and those in support have a total of 10 minutes to speak.
Thank you, Chair Fox, members of the Planning Commission, Samuel Morris, Longleaf Law Partners, 4509 Creedmoor Road, Suite 302, here on behalf of the applicants. We're here today requesting to rezone a 4.19 acre assemblage located on Crest Road, Varsity Drive, and College View Avenue from its current R10 zoning with a special residential parking overlay district to residential mixed use 7 with an urban limited frontage. The purpose of this request is to allow for a broader range of residential development options and for greater contribution to the housing supply and urban form in an area that is designated as high-scale residential and in close proximity to the Western Boulevard BRT. So as you just saw, here's a look at the existing conditions. It is a 16 parcel assemblage with frontage on College View, Varsity, and Crest. Here's a slightly higher look, just showing you that the property is located within walking distance to a number of employment, retail opportunities. It's right there next to NC State campus and is in close proximity to the Western Boulevard BRT area, which of course runs along Western Boulevard to the north. Here's a look at the current zoning, which is of course R10 with that special residential parking overlay district. The future land use map designates this block and much of the surrounding area as high-scale residential and then buffers that down with some moderate-scale residential. And then, of course, you have the university over to the east and then some lower-scale residential to the west. The urban form map shows that this property falls within a frequent transit area and is within walking distance of the BRT area and the planned BRT station at Gorman and Western Boulevard, giving it a core transit context. It also is, of course, served by multiple Go Raleigh and Wolf Line routes today, currently. So with that kind of high transit context in mind and the higher scale residential, LU2 gives us guidance for heights up to 12 stories. As you heard, we are, of course, only asking for 7, and we are supporting that height with an urban frontage. Just to quickly overview, like JP mentioned, there are a number of comprehensive policies that are consistent and favor this request, capitalizing on that transit access. It's within walking distance to that BRT station, and so higher intensity residential uses are encouraged to take advantage of that transit investment. Greenhouse gas reduction, of course, close proximity to NC State, a higher density urban form type development on this property is going to increase walkability, bikeability, less miles traveled in this area in vehicles. Of course, we'll zone for more intensity and more variety of housing, and it meets the comp plan's guidance on frontage because we are in that BRT area and we are asking for an increase in height. We did include that urban frontage as part of our request. And just to quickly touch on the special residential parking overlay district, I'll let JP correct me if I'm wrong in any way, but my understanding is that that just applies to single family, detached single family dwellings and relates to parking in front of the building. The plan for this property is multifamily, and so that overlay district is pretty much irrelevant, or would not be relevant in any future development pursuant to this rezoning. And then my last comment is I'll address the one sort of inconsistent policy, if it were, LU 5.1, which discusses reinforcing the urban pattern in the city. I think we should view this policy kind of in both the current and future context, like JP mentioned, although we understand that most of the properties that abut the site currently are those single-family, detached, or duplex, triplex kind of housing. We'd say even currently, this is in the NC State area, and there's dozens of apartment complexes within, a couple miles of the site. So we think we are, an apartment complex is not necessarily inconsistent with the current urban pattern in this area, but more importantly, viewing urban pattern from a future perspective, the entire area, pretty much surrounding our property with the exclusion of the moderate scale residential across Crest. The vision for this area is high density residential, and that is what we're requesting. We understand there are certain circumstances where like CX, part of a larger mixed use district, a CX12, bumps up against a residential subdivision that's R6 or R10 maybe, but that requires some kind of additional consideration. We think that the current status as a university area in conjunction with the future land use designation, we don't think that this request is necessarily inconsistent. Specifically, that policy notes that quality site design and planning should ensure that the goals of increasing density in urban form are implemented without adverse impacts. We are very confident that we are going to be able to engage in quality site design that will mitigate any potential adverse impacts. Just all of that, keeping in mind this is a high-scale residential area. We're only asking for 7 stories, even though comp plan and Flume, suggests up to 12. We're adding that urban frontage, and of course the UDO neighborhood transitions will apply as well, because we are asking for a mixed-use district that will be abutting R10 with single-family on it. So those zones A, B, and C that require at least 10 feet and up to 50 feet in of a vegetated and fenced buffer, as well as the zone B, which prohibits certain uses and requires sort of open space, whether it be outdoor amenity area or parking, and then the zone C, which limits certain heights too. It kind of steps that height back. So we think, given the kind of moderate scale of this request, the inclusion of the urban frontage, and keeping those transitions in mind, that on the whole, we can expect quality site design and planning that will address any potential adverse impacts. So that's our response to that policy. And if there's any other questions, I'm happy to take them.
Thank you. Just want to check in and see if there are any members of the public here to speak on this item. No. Move on to questions and comments from commissioners. I'll start with, upon initially reading the staff report, I did acknowledge and agree with the inconsistency in the height. But then when I considered it further, reducing the height here would likely change you from a 5/2 podium construction with a park under to 5-story stick with a surface lot. And that's perhaps not a condition I would want to promote in this context. So allowing the height here, in my mind, is acknowledging that you're not going to get height or additional density on some of the portions of the NC State campus, which is across the road there. So allowing more here allows that other side to have less. So that was just my particular thinking about it. If there are any additional comments from commissioners?
Yep. I'm a little worried about the displacement that's going on here, and I'm not familiar with the demographics of the area now. It was highly, there was a lot of Spanish-speaking folks when I was familiar with this region, and so I would imagine that the reason that we don't have people here at this meeting and that some of the public meetings were a little underattended, there might be a communication barrier. I would love to see the applicant communicate in Spanish and perhaps include a condition for a 120-day notice like we've seen before in a couple of other cases before eviction, because it's going to be hard to find housing like this anywhere in the area.
I don't know if the EJ screen picked up alternate languages.
Yeah, so according to the EJ screen data, there is a higher percentage of linguistically isolated population, so 8% versus 3%. So it does kind of line up with that comment.
Okay, excellent.
So to follow up, sorry, were the notices sent in Spanish as well?
No, the notices were not sent in Spanish, just English.
So weird when that was a text change and someone recommended that we put them in Spanish. It's funny when that comes back.
That's,
Anyway.
I'll just say that's something that I remember asking a question about a long time ago. If the demographic indicator shows a higher percentage of LEP persons, there seems like there should be some sort of trigger, some sort of something, maybe on the city's end, requiring the applicant to do outreach in that language. So we don't have anybody here to speak about it. I actually didn't have an issue with this, but we don't have anyone here to speak about it. But now we know that perhaps a lot of the people that could have spoken about it didn't get the notification in the language that they speak. That's problematic for me.
Do we also know the LEP population, if it is in fact Spanish or if it is South Asian?
I believe we'd have to do a little bit more digging to understand what the actual makeup of that language or what languages are spoken are.
Sure. Are you the part of the applicant team?
I'm a property owner of 16 properties.
Excellent.
My name's Timothy Stevens, 2574 Corleywood Drive, and I actually put together the 16 parcels, and I just wanted to let y'all know that we do not have any Hispanic folks living in the 16 parcels. It's currently 0%, and additionally, the folks in this parcel that are renting all got 1-year leases and all understand what potentially could happen to this particular property down the road. So if we did contact them, almost a major majority would say they already understand what's happening with this particular area. So I just want to make that clarification.
Thank you. That gives good context.
Okay.
Are there any follow-up questions for the applicant while we have them available? Nope. So hearing perhaps it might be the will of the commission to add an additional condition regarding notice to tenants, even though we now have new information about a 1-year lease. Do we still want to require that?
I'm okay moving on without it.
Okay. If there are no additional questions or comments from commissioners, I'd like to entertain a motion. Commissioner Dautel?
Thanks, Chair Fox. Let's see. Regarding KZ 3522, I move to recommend adoption of the proposed consistency statement dated August 30, 2022, containing the agenda materials, and recommend approval of the zoning amendment. The action taken is reasonable and in the public interest because the request would increase the number of potential housing units in an area that is within walking distance to high-frequency transit service and allows an appropriate mix of and intensity of uses that would support the city's major investment in high-frequency transit service.
Thank you. And do we have a second?
I'll second.
Commissioner Mann? Commissioner Dautel has offered a motion to recommend approval of Z3522. Commissioner Mann has offered a second. Is there any additional discussion or debate on the merits of the motion? Seeing none, by show of hands, those in favor? Any opposed? That motion passes unanimously. And moving on to the next item on the agenda, item F.6, which is Z3622 on Lynn Road. This is a request to rezone just under 1 acre from residential 4 to residential 6. This is a general use case and no inconsistencies have been identified. We'll start off with a staff presentation from Hannah Recco.
Good morning. So this is the zoning site, 1801 Lynn Road, in a predominantly residential area, a large area of R4. There is one smaller area south on Benbow Road that has R6 CU zoning. take a look at the location. This is in North Raleigh, east of the intersection of Creedmoor Road and Lynn Road. There's commercial uses around that intersection, and then lower scale residential. Lynn Road Elementary School is farther down Lynn Road. Zoom in a little bit. You can see that the site has frontage on both Lynn Road and Ben Burr Road. I believe the house that you can see in this aerial no longer is on the site. And a few views of the site from its various frontages. And as was mentioned, this is a general use request, so there are no zoning conditions proposed. The change here, one residential district to another. So the difference is really smaller lot sizes and smaller setbacks would be permitted, so if additional housing units could locate on the site. The site has an average walk and transit score, a lower bike score than the city overall, but overall not a high cost of transportation in the area, and average proximity to jobs. There is bus service on Creedmoor Road, about half a mile away from the site. And the request would increase the number of units that could be located on the site, including a number of housing types, smaller lot sizes than average overall, and transit within half a mile. Demographic analysis shows smaller proportion of the area's population are people of color or low-income populations, and the rental costs in the area increased slower than the citywide average. Urban future land use map designation is low-scale residential. R6 is one of the districts that aligns with that designation. No urban form guidance, and the request is for a residential district, so mute point. And then the case is consistent overall with the comprehensive plan. And so you see policies on increasing the variety of housing, amount of housing, and compatibility with the surrounding area. And no inconsistent policies were identified. And I can answer any questions you have.
Thank you very much, Ms. Recco. Next, we're going to hear from the applicant. The applicant and those in support have a total of 10 minutes to speak.
Sure. Hi, Chair Fox, members of the Planning Commission. Hannah, thank you for that presentation. I'm the owner and applicant of this property. It is a vacant lot. The previous owner removed the house that had been on the site. It's a comparatively large lot at an acre that is right down the street from Lynn Road Elementary. There's a park down the street, and this lot in particular, NCDOT restricts driveway access from Lynn Road, so we need to orient development from Ben Burr Road, and R6 with its guidelines would help to subdivide the property. And we're excited about the missing middle changes that have recently been adopted. I'd note that the area has had one recent rezoning to R6, and the neighborhood is dynamically changing in the last few years. I think there have been 5 subdivisions in the immediate walking distance from this site. So we're excited for more people to move to this area and create what would otherwise, I call it attainable housing. It may not be affordable housing, but it is attainable housing that is not what you otherwise see in this area of big lots with big McMansions. These would be more something attainable for more folks in Raleigh to have. And from a development standpoint, we think this is an easy opportunity to take what is a vacant lot that already has streets developed around it, already has water and sewer around it. This is a green development approach to say, let's put some more people in this spot. I'd also note that we've met with many times on site with all the immediate neighbors, and we think that there's good support for our rezoning. And if you have any questions, be happy to take them.
Excellent, thank you. And unless people are hiding, there's no members of the public here, though I can't see every single seat. We'll move on to questions and comments from commissioners. Does anyone have any questions or comments? Personally, I find no inconsistencies with this particular case, and I do think it's supported overall in the comprehensive plan. So I'd like to entertain a motion.
I got it up.
Awesome.
I move to recommend adoption of the proposed consistency statement dated August 30th, 2022, contained in the agenda materials, and to recommend approval of the zoning amendment.
Excellent. Do we have a second? Commissioner Lampman? Commissioner Otwell has offered a motion to approve Z3622. Commissioner Lampman has offered a second. Is there any discussion or debate on the merits of the motion? Seeing none, by show of hands, those in favor? Any opposed? That motion passes unanimously. Well done, everyone. Okay, moving on to wrapping up. Concludes all the discussion items on our agenda. Next is report of the chair and members. We do plan on having an annual retreat for members. Again, pay attention to email. I'm working with Mr. Crane right now and what that agenda might entail and what the date would be. That's all I have for today, so we can go down the line and see if any other members have a report.
Don't have anything.
Excellent. Again, well done. And moving on to the report from the Assistant Director.
You've got my report in your backup, so I won't belabor the information there. No additional information for you other than what the chairperson just mentioned. We're moving towards framing in a retreat for this fall, likely looking for next month. I guess that would be a month after October, to have a retreat. We normally hold these in half-day increments for those of you that might not have experienced this in the past. So generally a 9 to noon type of meeting, and we would like to do it off-site this year in person. So be on the lookout for emails from staff about solicitation for ideas or comments as we move forward. I'm sorry?
What generally target, I know you said October, but would it be like a Tuesday, or would we?
Generally, we look towards the end of the week, which would be a Thursday, Friday. Friday has been our consistent rhythm for a number of years, so we'll start there. But we certainly will involve the Planning Commission in the planning.
Go ahead.
Can you guys speak to whether you anticipate us having many more special meetings in the future?
That's a great question. I'll indirectly answer your question this way. We have a very large load of pending cases right now. I think y'all hear me say this quite often. We're somewhere in the neighborhood just south of 80 pending zoning cases, which is a lot. Bynum and I were talking yesterday, actually, and I don't think we've seen volumes this high. I certainly haven't in my tenure with the city, and I've been here almost 15 years. Looking back through our case history, the last time we had a collection of cases this large was back in 2000. So it will take us time and attention to get through the pending workload. I think it's entirely possible that we'll have additional special meetings. I think the Committee of the Whole will likely need to have some special meetings because there are more and more cases that are being filtered there. As you remember, your bylaws tell us when cases are referred there, and we're just seeing more cases that are inconsistent with the future land use map and the comprehensive plan overall. So it's very likely we'll have a special meeting of the committee. It's also, I think, very likely we'll have another special meeting of the Planning Commission before year's end.
Terrified and fascinated by your response. Okay. With that, if there's nothing else for the good of the order, I'm gonna call it. That concludes this meeting of the Planning Commission. Thanks, everyone.